This girl can't even boil water properly, Clarence announced, his knife tapping against the edge of my grandmother's heirloom serving platter. Everyone at the Thanksgiving table went silent before erupting into waves of laughter. Even Elian, my husband of 3 years, couldn't maintain eye contact with me as his lips curled into an apologetic half-smile. I stood frozen, serving spoon suspended above the turkey I'd spent 14 hours preparing. The special brine, the herb butter under the skin, the careful temperature monitoring, all dismissed with 6 cutting words and a wave of my father-in-law's hand. Maybe next year we should order from that place downtown, Elian's sister Petra suggested, throwing me what she probably thought was a lifeline but felt more like an anchor. My throat tightened as everyone around the table stared at me, waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if I'd crumble or fight back. I lowered the serving spoon and straightened my spine. I'm sure everyone can form their own opinions, I said quietly. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. 3 Thanksgivings, 3 Christmases, countless Sunday dinners, all marked by Clarence's theatrical first bite, contemplative pause, and inevitable criticism delivered with an authority that silenced any defense I might offer. What no one knew, what I had only discovered last week, was that the culinary critic at the head of the table had been harboring a secret. And as I picked up the wine bottle and moved toward his empty glass, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I leaned close as I poured, my lips near his ear. I know about your taste dysgeusia, I whispered. His face turned ghost white. Before we continue, leave a comment letting us know if you've ever dealt with someone who constantly criticizes your efforts no matter how hard you try. And stay until the end to rate this revenge story on a scale from 1 to 10. Let's dive back in. My name is Maeve, and until 3 years ago, I believed cooking was a love language. Growing up with a grandmother who showed affection through perfectly timed soufflés and delicate pastries, I learned that feeding people was a way to nourish not just their bodies but their souls. When I met Elian at a community garden workshop, our romance blossomed over shared plates and kitchen experiments. He loved my boldness with spices, my willingness to attempt recipes from cultures I'd never experienced firsthand. You cook with curiosity, he told me on our 3rd date after I'd prepared a Portuguese fish stew I'd never made before. 1 month before our wedding, I met his parents. Clarence and Vivienne arrived at our apartment with polished smiles and a bottle of wine I couldn't pronounce. Elian had warned me. Dad fancies himself a food critic. Writes for the local paper. Don't take it personally. That first dinner, I prepared a roast chicken with lemon and herbs. Simple but elegant. I still remember Clarence's expression as he took his first bite, the way his eyes narrowed slightly, the careful consideration before he spoke. Interesting choice to pair rosemary with lemon, he said. Quite pedestrian, but executed adequately. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. Each subsequent meal followed the same pattern. He would dissect my cooking as if conducting an autopsy, identifying every perceived flaw with surgical precision. After our wedding, it only intensified. Family gatherings became performances where I was always the reluctant star, my culinary efforts the subject of his unflinching critique. You need to stand up to him, my sister told me over the phone. It's just his way, Elian would say, rubbing my shoulders after particularly brutal assessments. He does it to everyone. But he didn't. I noticed how he praised Vivienne's occasionally bland casseroles, how he complimented restaurant meals that even I could tell were mediocre. There seemed to be no logic to his taste, no consistent standard against which he measured food quality. Until last week, when everything suddenly made terrible sense. The weather had turned cold early this year, and Elian mentioned wanting to show me photos from a childhood ski trip. They're in an album at my parents' house, he said. We can look next time we're there. We visited the following Saturday for lunch. While Elian and his father discussed replacing the deck boards out back, Vivienne asked me to find the photo album. Should be in Clarence's study, she said, waving toward the room he kept meticulously organized and generally off-limits. I'd never been inside before. The walls were lined with bookshelves, every volume aligned with precision. A large desk dominated the center, its surface clear except for a lamp and a leather-bound notebook. The photo albums were on the bottom shelf, but as I crouched to retrieve them, I bumped the shelf above. A medical journal fell, landing open on the floor. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except for the neon yellow highlighting that covered much of the visible page. My eyes caught phrases like inverted taste perception and chronic condition. I picked up the journal, telling myself I was just putting it back. but my eyes kept scanning the highlighted text. It detailed a rare condition called taste dysgeusia, where patients experience certain flavors as their opposites. Sweet registers as bitter, salty as bland, sour as sweet. The margins were filled with handwriting I recognized as Clarence's, detailed notes, appointment dates, medication adjustments dating back 15 years. I should have closed the journal then. Instead, I turned the page. And that's when I found something even more shocking tucked between the pages. A collection of restaurant reviews he'd written for the local paper. He'd built his reputation as a culinary authority on these reviews. But beside each published critique was his original draft, with completely opposite opinions. A Thai restaurant he'd publicly praised for its balanced, nuanced curry was described in his notes as overwhelmingly sweet, lacking any depth. A steakhouse he'd criticized for oversalting was noted privately as bland, requires significant seasoning. He wasn't just hiding his condition, he was overcompensating by intentionally inverting his reviews to match what people without his condition would taste. The realization hit me with stunning clarity. If he experienced flavors as their opposites, then everything he'd ever said about my cooking was inverted too. Every criticism was actually a compliment. Every dismissal, a silent appreciation. I carefully replaced the journal and took the photo album to the living room, my mind racing with this new information. For 3 years, I doubted myself, questioned my abilities, spent countless hours trying to impress a man who couldn't even taste food the way it was intended, who had built an entire persona around a lie. As I helped Vivienne prepare lunch that day, I watched Clarence with new eyes. The careful way he selected certain condiments. How he always complained about Vivienne's sweet tea but drank it anyway. "Is everything all right, Maeve?" Vivienne asked, catching me staring at her husband. "Just thinking about Thanksgiving," I replied. "I want to make sure everything's perfect this year." And I meant it. Everything would be perfect, just not in the way anyone expected. That night, as Elian slept beside me, I began planning. If Clarence experienced flavors as their opposites, I could use that knowledge. I could prepare a meal that would force him to either praise what everyone else found terrible or lie about his actual experience for the first time. The question was, how far was I willing to go to expose his deception? As Thanksgiving approached, I finalized my strategy. I volunteered to host dinner at our house, a first in our marriage. I created 2 shopping lists, one for the traditional items everyone would expect, and a second for my special ingredients. "You're going all out this year," Elian commented, watching me fill our kitchen with groceries. "I want it to be memorable," I replied. Memorable it would be. The night before Thanksgiving, I prepared 2 versions of each dish. The ones for display, perfect, aromatic, exactly what holiday food should be, and the ones that would actually be served, deliberately oversalted, overspiced, or slightly undercooked. Everything was calculated. The turkey, brined in a solution 3 times saltier than recommended, stuffing with twice the sage it needed, cranberry sauce with half the sugar, green beans left deliberately al dente, mashed potatoes with sour cream that had just begun to turn. To anyone with normal taste buds, the meal would be barely edible. But to Clarence, with his inverted perception, it should taste like the best Thanksgiving dinner he'd ever had. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, preparing, labeling containers, and making sure nothing could be confused. When Elian wandered into the kitchen for water around midnight, I shooed him back to bed. "It's a surprise," I told him, "trust me." Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. Guests would arrive at 2. By noon, the house smelled divine. From the display dishes I had no intention of serving. The actual meal waited, hidden in our second refrigerator in the garage. As I set the table with our best china, a moment of doubt crept in. Was I taking this too far? Was revenge worth potentially ruining a holiday? Then I remembered 3 years of criticism. 3 years of second-guessing myself. 3 years of watching my husband squirm uncomfortably as his father dismantled my cooking piece by piece. Yes, it was worth it. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock. Clarence and Vivienne always arrived precisely on time, never early, never late. "Something smells wonderful," Vivienne said, handing me a bottle of wine as she entered. Clarence sniffed the air, his expression already analyzing. "Interesting choice of herbs," he commented. I smiled. I tried something different this year. As more family members arrived, Elian's sister Petra with her husband, his brother Dominic and his new girlfriend, a few cousins, I maintained the charade. I showed off the beautiful display dishes, letting everyone admire them, before taking them back to the kitchen to keep warm. There, I swapped them for their deliberately flawed counterparts. No one saw the switch. When everyone gathered around the table, anticipation hung in the air. This was my moment. "Elian, would you carve the turkey?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. As my husband stood to begin the ritual carving, I filled wine glasses. I saved Clarence for last, personally pouring his wine, a special bottle I'd prepared with just enough vinegar to be noticeable to anyone else, but which his inverted taste would likely perceive as exceptionally smooth. I leaned close as I poured. "I know about your taste, dysgeusia," I whispered, my lips barely moving. "And what's in this wine would taste like vinegar to anyone else. But I bet it's delicious to you." His face turned ghost white. "The entire meal was prepared specifically for your condition." I continued softly. "Everything is deliberately oversalted, overspiced, or slightly undercooked. Everyone else will find it barely edible. But with your inverted taste perception, it should be perfect for you." He stared at his plate in horror, trapped in an impossible situation. If he praised my cooking, everyone would question his judgment when they tasted the deliberately flawed food. If he criticized it, he'd be lying about his actual experience for the first time. I took my seat, heart pounding beneath my calm exterior. "Everything looks beautiful, Maeve," Vivienne said, unaware of the silent battle taking place across the table. Clarence sat frozen, his eyes darting between his plate and my face. "Well?" his wife prompted. "How is it, dear?" All eyes turned to Clarence, waiting for his verdict. After all, his opinion was the one that really mattered. Wasn't it? That's what everyone had been conditioned to believe. He lifted his fork with a slightly trembling hand and took a bite of the oversalted stuffing. I held my breath. He took a reluctant bite, and I saw confusion flash across his face as the flavors registered. "It's..." He hesitated, looking trapped. "Actually quite good." The table fell silent. Elian paused mid-carve, the serving fork suspended in air. Petra lifted her water glass, then set it down without drinking. Vivienne's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. "Did you just say good?" Dominic asked, sounding genuinely confused. In 3 years, he'd never heard his father offer unqualified praise for my cooking. Clarence cleared his throat. "The turkey is tender. The seasoning is balanced." The words seemed physically painful for him to speak. His eyes darted to mine, pleading silently. I just smiled and gestured for everyone to serve themselves. "Well, if Clarence approves, this must be your best meal yet," Vivienne said warmly, piling food onto her plate. I watched as each person took their first bites. Petra was first, scooping a forkful of mashed potatoes into her mouth. Her eyes widened instantly. She reached for her water glass, draining half of it in one gulp. "That's certainly unique," she managed, her voice strained. Dominic's girlfriend Renee took a bite of turkey and immediately began coughing. "So much pepper," she whispered to him. Elian, my loyal husband, tried valiantly to hide his reaction as he chewed a piece of stuffing. But I knew every micro-expression on his face. The slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, the momentary widening of his eyes, the subtle clench of his jaw. "Maeve," he said softly, "did you try a new recipe this year?" "Several," I replied, my voice bright. "I wanted to surprise everyone." "Well, you've certainly succeeded," Vivienne murmured, discreetly spitting food into her napkin. All eyes turned back to Clarence, who was continuing to eat with apparent enjoyment. He took a long sip of the vinegar-laced wine, and something close to pleasure flickered across his face before he caught himself. "So, Clarence," I said, my voice carrying across the table, "you really enjoy the meal? Nothing you would criticize? Nothing at all?" He swallowed hard. "It's exemplary." "Dad, are you feeling okay?" Petra asked, concern evident in her voice. "You always have something critical to say about Maeve's cooking." "I simply recognize quality when I taste it," he replied stiffly. Elian's brother Dominic took a bite of green beans and nearly choked. "Quality? These are practically raw." "I like them crisp," Clarence said defensively. Vivienne was looking increasingly confused. "But you always complain when I leave vegetables al dente. You say they're undercooked." The tension at the table was building. Everyone was looking at Clarence now, their faces showing various degrees of confusion and suspicion. "Try the cranberry sauce," I suggested innocently. "I made it especially tart this year." Vivienne took a small spoonful and visibly winced at the acidic bite. "It's certainly memorable." "Delicious," Clarence insisted, taking a large portion. "Best cranberry sauce I've ever had." Something in his voice, perhaps the strain of maintaining the lie, made Vivienne stare at her husband with new scrutiny. "What is going on with you today?" she demanded. "First, you praise Maeve's cooking when it's clearly not up to her usual standard, then you're enjoying food prepared exactly the way you always claim to hate it." Clarence's face had turned an alarming shade of red. He shot me a look of pure hatred before schooling his features. "Perhaps my palate has evolved," he said curtly. Elian set down his fork with a decisive clink. "Dad, no offense to Maeve, but this food is terrible. It's like everything is backwards. Too salty, too sour, undercooked. Yet you're sitting there acting like it's a 5-star meal. Are you feeling all right?" Vivienne pressed, placing a hand on Clarence's forehead. "Maybe we should check your blood pressure." The walls were closing in on him. I could see it in his eyes, the desperate calculation, the realization that his carefully constructed persona was crumbling. "There's nothing wrong with me," he snapped, his composure finally breaking. "Then explain why you're praising food that tastes like this," Dominic challenged, pushing his plate away. The room fell silent. Every eye was on Clarence. The moment stretched, taut as a wire about to snap. "I have a condition," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. "Food doesn't taste the same to me as it does to you." Vivienne's hand flew to her mouth. "What are you talking about?" "It's called taste dysgeusia," he continued, not meeting anyone's eyes. "I've had it for 15 years. Flavors register as their opposites to me. Sweet tastes bitter, salty tastes bland, sour tastes sweet." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. I could see the wheels turning in everyone's minds, recalibrating years of interactions, of meals, of critiques. "You've had this for 15 years?" Vivienne repeated, her voice rising. "And you never told me? Your wife of 32 years?" "I didn't want anyone to know," he muttered. "So all those times you criticized my mother's cooking," Elian began. "And the restaurants you've reviewed for the paper," Petra added. "You've been lying," Dominic finished. Clarence's shoulders slumped. "Not lying. Compensating. I learned what foods should taste like to normal people. I adjusted my reactions accordingly. So when you said Maeve's cooking was terrible..." Elian looked at me, understanding dawning on his face. "He actually loved it," I said quietly. Every dish he criticized was actually perfect to his inverted taste. The realization rippled through the room. 3 years of criticism suddenly recontextualized. 3 years of undermining my confidence, of making me second-guess every pinch of salt, every minute of cooking time. "Is that true?" Elian asked his father directly. Clarence couldn't meet his son's eyes. "Her cooking has always been exceptional. To my palate." The admission hung in the air, both vindication and accusation. "Why would you do that?" Vivienne's voice was thick with emotion. "Why criticize something you actually enjoyed?" "Because," Clarence burst out, his composure finally shattering completely. "Do you have any idea what it's like, to have everything taste wrong? To not be able to enjoy food the way everyone else does? To have to pretend constantly that you're experiencing what they're experiencing? So you took it out on Maeve?" Elian's voice had a dangerous edge I'd never heard before. "I didn't want anyone to know about my condition," Clarence said, his voice smaller now. "I've built my reputation as someone with discerning taste. The newspaper column, the food blog, it would all be meaningless if people knew. So instead you made me feel worthless," I said, finally giving voice to 3 years of hurt. "You made me doubt myself, question my abilities, spend countless hours trying to please someone who is lying with every critique." The table fell silent again. Even Clarence seemed to have run out of defenses. "How did you find out?" he finally asked me. "The medical journal in your study," I answered honestly. "I saw your notes, the appointment dates, the medication adjustments, and then I found your restaurant reviews, both the published versions and your actual opinions." Vivienne turned to her husband, shock written across her face. "You keep medication for this condition?" You go to doctor's appointments? How did I not know? I scheduled them during your garden club meetings, he admitted. The medication is in my gym bag. 15 years of deception, she whispered. What else don't I know about you? The meal was forgotten now. The carefully orchestrated revenge had unveiled something deeper than I'd anticipated. A marriage built on omission. A family dynamic constructed around a central lie. Elian reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it gently. You knew about this when you prepared the meal today, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Everything is deliberately oversalted, overspiced, or undercooked. I made it so it would taste perfect to someone with his condition, but terrible to everyone else. Instead of anger, I saw something like admiration flicker in my husband's eyes. That's diabolical, he whispered. That's justice, I replied. Clarence pushed back from the table. I think we should go. No, Vivienne said sharply. You don't get to run from this. Not anymore. She turned to me. Maeve, do you have any of the regular food you prepared? The display dishes I saw earlier? I nodded. In the second refrigerator. They're the properly prepared versions. Bring those out, she commanded. We'll start over. And Clarence? She fixed her husband with a stare that could have cut diamond. You will tell us exactly how everything tastes to you. No more lies. No more pretending. As I went to retrieve the proper dishes, I heard the uncomfortable silence in the dining room break into urgent, hushed conversations. Family secrets have a weight all their own, and this one had been crushing me for 3 years without anyone else feeling its burden. In the kitchen, Elian found me. He wrapped his arms around me from behind as I transferred a perfect turkey to a serving platter. I'm sorry, he murmured against my hair. I should have stood up for you all those times. You didn't know, I said, but we both recognized the half-truth. He might not have known about his father's condition, but he had known about the criticism, the undermining, the constant belittling of my efforts. I knew he was unfair to you, he admitted. I just didn't know how to stop it without causing a scene. And now? Now I wish I'd caused 100 scenes, he said fiercely. You deserved better. When we returned to the dining room with the proper food, the atmosphere had changed. Clarence sat subdued, looking smaller somehow. Vivienne's eyes were red-rimmed but determined. We're going to do this differently now, she announced as I set down the platters. Clarence will tell us exactly how each dish tastes to him. Then he'll tell us how he would have described it before today. It became a strange, revelatory meal. Clarence would take a bite of properly prepared food and describe the inverted flavors he experienced. How the perfectly salted stuffing tasted bland to him. How the buttery mashed potatoes seemed sour. How the sweetened cranberry sauce registered as intensely bitter. And you've been experiencing food this way since before we met? Vivienne asked at one point. No, he admitted. It developed later. About 15 years ago. The doctors think it might be related to the sinus surgery I had. So you remember what food is supposed to taste like? Yes, he said quietly. That's the cruelest part. I remember, but I can't experience it anymore. Something in my chest loosened slightly at his vulnerability. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Why didn't you just tell us? Petra asked, the hurt evident in her voice. We're your family. Clarence stared at his plate for a long moment before answering. Pride, he finally said. Stupid, ridiculous pride. I built my identity around being a food connoisseur. How could I admit that I couldn't actually taste food the way everyone else does? So instead you criticized Maeve's cooking when you actually loved it? Elian's voice still held an edge. I thought I was being clever, Clarence admitted. If I criticized what actually tasted good to me, I assumed it would be bad to normal palates. If I praised what tasted terrible to me, it would be good to everyone else. But that's not how taste works, I said. Food isn't simply good or bad. There's balance, complexity, personal preference. I realize that now, he said, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time. Your cooking confused me because it tasted wonderful to me, which meant I thought it must be terrible to everyone else. But Elian always seemed to enjoy it, which made no sense in my twisted logic. Because it was actually good, Elian said. To both of you, for entirely different reasons. The remainder of the meal progressed with a strange new honesty. The proper food was enjoyed by everyone except Clarence, who described his inverted experience with each bite. Years of miscommunication were unpacked alongside second helpings of properly prepared turkey. As dessert was served, a pumpkin pie that Clarence described as tasting like savory cheese to him. Vivienne turned to me. "Thank you," she said unexpectedly. "For what?" I asked, surprised. "For forcing this into the open," she replied. 15 years of confusion finally makes sense. Why he stopped enjoying my cooking. Why restaurant dates became awkward. Why he became so critical of everyone's food. I hadn't expected gratitude. Anger, perhaps. Resentment at being publicly exposed. But not this. "You're not angry about what I did today?" I asked. She gave me a wry smile. "Oh, I'm furious that you deliberately served us inedible food, but I'm grateful you exposed a lie that's been poisoning our family for years." As the evening wound down and family members prepared to leave, Clarence approached me in the kitchen where I was packing leftovers. "That was quite the performance," he said. His voice held no anger, just weary acknowledgement. "It wasn't a performance," I replied. "It was a revelation." He nodded slowly. "You could have exposed me privately." "Like you criticized me privately?" I countered. "No, this needed witnesses. This needed to be as public as your humiliation of me has been for 3 years." He was quiet for a long moment. "I've spent 15 years hiding my condition, compensating, overcompensating. I built an entire persona around a lie." He met my eyes directly. "It's exhausting." "It's also over," I said simply. "No more hiding, no more pretending. No more reviewing restaurants either," he said with a hint of regret. "Who would trust the palate of someone with taste dysphosia?" "Maybe not," I conceded. "But maybe there's something more honest you could do. Write about your condition. Help others who might be suffering silently." Something like interest flickered in his eyes. "Perhaps." As he turned to leave, he paused. "Your cooking really has always been excellent, Maeve. To my warped taste buds, at least." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start. After everyone had gone, Elian and I sat at our kitchen counter, emotionally drained but somehow lighter. "That's not how I expected today to go," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Me neither," I admitted. "I thought I wanted revenge. Public humiliation for all the times he humiliated me. Instead you got the truth," I finished. "Which turns out to be more complicated and more healing than revenge would have been." Elian took my hand. "I'm proud of you. Not just for standing up to him, but for how you handled it once everything was out in the open." "We still have a lot to work through," I said. 3 years of criticism doesn't disappear with one explanation. "No," he agreed, "but it's a start." That night, as we lay in bed, Elian turned to me. "Next Thanksgiving, what do you think about making 2 versions of everything? One for normal taste buds, and one specifically for Dad's condition?" I smiled in the darkness. "That might be nice. Because sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't public humiliation, but finally being seen and understood for exactly who you are." If you enjoyed this story of food, family secrets, and sweet revenge, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of justice served. Have you ever discovered someone was hiding something that explained their behavior toward you? Share your experience in the comments. And don't forget to rate this story from 1 to 10. Was the revenge too mild, just right, or would you have taken it even further? Let me know below.